I would like to begin with an explanation called the poem. The poem has its own martyr, its own logic, its own sense, and is at the center of its own rebellion. The leap is not great from that understanding to the lines of this poem, composition, an angry wind of words races towards its period. For me, it's not hard to see in those lines a parallel with the poet Leroy Jones. For it could be said that he is racing in almost the same fashion towards his situation, about which I've tried to say something in How Hard the Surface That Cuts Across the Grain. How hard the surface that cuts across the grain. Leroy started out in life to end up ahead, with all his poems behind him, tucked away in his beard and the circles of his eyes, when he was coming the right way. You knew who he was and what he thought and who he knew and what he did and how he would end up in your library and what you would think about him getting there from where he'd been. But Leroy refused to keep coming this way, and zigged and zagged and ranted and raged like an Indian we'd forgot to kill. How hard now the surface that cuts you down and makes us bleed all over this land. This next poem, I don't doubt, comes out of the same sort of desperation that has led Leroy away. It's called My People Are More Than 350 Years Old. I guess this business with me about this kind of sensitivity is wrong, at least is not enough. I understand that my people are more than 350 years old. I mean how thin this paper is, and yet its edges can cut, if not as deep as $23 million. Understand, I gave nothing, and I walk around with a knife in my back pocket. For the streets, I know, are so long and deep that the houses have raised their lintel brows as if seeing the corners we're coming to. I'd like to go back a bit now to a thing I've called a reconstruction of a me. You do not know me And Tompkins Park is a graveyard. The old Irish man in the green suit no longer haunts it. The quiet Jews are gone too, and the black children have beaten paths through all the grass. There was glass all over the park, pieces from so many lives, gleaming like stars. I went back and tried to stand in the same places. Then, what I remember of being I want to, and I see me. I took bad pictures for 18 years. My eyes always suspended themselves from the tops of the windows. Still, I saw the world. There were 3 me's in my house. My brother was blacker blackest, and he used to say something about the sweeter juice of blacker berries. My sister, the she-me, was just blacker and taller, and I always knew when I was looking up. In fact, my grandmother burned an oil lamp so long that I remember when I turned on the lights in our house. I was so short that the trolley car man never asked a question until one day. He said I was at least 6. The 3 pennies in my pocket were silent. I hitched a ride that day. I laughed at the distance Lennox was running into, and then I fell into the empty street. I wouldn't hitch any more after that, and Lennox and the others wouldn't walk from Prospect Park because their polo shirts stuck to them. Then an Italian boy used to play with me, and his sister played with no one. She was always coming for him when he was picking his nose or pulling his pants out of his behind. His brother worked in the store and used to laugh at me begging for old fruit. And before that, one boy in school called my head the Pacific Ocean. I kept watching him, knowing that the Atlantic was smaller. And before that, another boy used to thump me on the head and tell me not to turn around. One day, behind a bush, I slapped him hard in the face and walked home feeling in my body and the apple in my hand from the teacher. In the new school, there was a boy named Robert who couldn't see the red in Renee's face as well as I because he loved her. Everybody could read then, and a doctor's son was in my class, and once I got a higher mark than him and the white boys, who were smart but in the yard failed at everything. Jesse Tompkins was the smartest black boy I'd ever met, and I was proud of him. One day, he got my tag, and I threw a rock at his head. What was that? 20 years ago. And now Gwen wants to go to the toilet. The wind turned the pages. A plane made a hole in the sky, and the noise rushed away. This first bright day in a long coming of the sun, and the grass, and the gold warm light. The bicycled boys went by, and my daughters rolled down the hill, over the greening grass, in the warming light and the bluing sky. towards a newer moment in their lives. Before I go on to the next poem, let me say that there are some poems you write that almost write themselves. They're, accordingly, a form of almost pure discovery, as opposed to, say, a reconstruction. This poem is such a poem. Discovery. Place your eyes in your ears, everybody. Noise is technicolor. Wait. Everyone is tired of games. Mouths hang open like traps, and millions of words have choked us to death. What did I say? What I want to say is that you can't place two black words next to each other. Wait. There is no thought you can't pronounce. Give the bastards crayons and set them loose in latrines. While we go on to the poem Tompkins Park. All the days of suns, of moons, of snows, of winds, of generations and generations have knocked the handball court down. Behind the library, the grass is no longer important. It was in the playground that I kept walking when Robert Dunstan made Cephas cry. But Cephas did not die there. He is buried in another cemetery, where all the winds, all the passings of time, make it impossible now to remember. What is left is really believing in and out of Cephas' fate. This next poem says more about Cephas, which is why I've called it a eulogy to Anonymous. I knew Cephas before the needle and the cold breath of what it was that happened. And Cephas had long fingers and windmill cookies he could break, like bread, like God, into a substance too earthy that ran from him. I knew Cephas way before the needle, when his mother held it and its long tail wiggled through the good holes in Cephas' life. I knew Cephas when he could run faster than me, and I was always it, and I was always it looking over his shoulders at his A's and B's and C's and D's in conduct, until his mother died and the wind blew cold and long over him and killed his father and left him heir to another needle that raised its head, like the serpent. And Cephas fell to come round later with the sin in his veins and his old skeleton shaking up the Holy Ghost of stickball games and things we tried to talk about to Cephas and me, because he'd been good to both of us, and we could not bury him yet, although he was always going down away from us into the pit that memory is. I guess I knew Cephas because he was better than me. And that was the great pain I could not swallow. Telling him to come back any time. But Cephas can't come anymore with no one to bring him, because he's not God. And the odds on resurrections are too long. And we don't bet on jailbirds. Cephas' death is allegorical. But you take my cousin Kennyman's. His death was real. I deal with it in the poem The Detectives. My cousin Kennyman is everyone climbing the peach tree one summer, getting that close to heaven alive. Today he is cold, and every man's death is news, bringing strangers to his mother's house to sit in her chairs, resurrecting bits of him like a puzzle. It took everything to kill my cousin, to bring the witnesses closer to his house, to sit in on the mystery like detectives. Death, at least it would seem so with poets, is an inexhaustive obsession. Perhaps it is because every day someone dies, as we might say, on the way to the wrong place, and all our sad lives we have to go on to the funeral, which is possibly what the next two poems are really about. First, the long cars. I did not go in the long cars. Every death increases its mystery, Mr. Bolin. I stand moved. This poem surrounds me in the feeling, is what is understood. And now, if we're not vain, a lifetime is all we're given to say the little that won't be forgotten. We touch only a few people before we find the right street to die on. No matter, there are clocks to keep our time. And if we're not vain, a stone cutter will chisel something nice on our markers, if told. It strikes me now that what poetry is pressure. It's condensation. It's bursting of your seams. Take the next two poems. First, the poem as aftermath. It seems I've put so much into life, and all at once, in a sudden, so quiet, so beautiful, I thought I'd share. before this and this kind of construction. And now the poem News. Every day comes as if for spite, as if that kind of consistency did not bring other news. But then, any form of brilliance threatens me. The understanding can split a thing as hard as a moment can be. I would like to say at this point what I would assume a lot of you know, and that is that there are some days when it is very hard to write a poem because you want to. Well, on such a day, I wrote small, warm, black strokes. Do not write a poem today. Perhaps no one has noticed how beautiful are the streets of the city. If paper could talk, it would help. Go for a walk or write a real American poem. There are reasons. I can't hear dead voices. In old stores, old clocks tick. One day God will laugh. I go on like a poet, having sat in all the chairs, having written in all the rooms. I suspect people want to know who I am. My cousin has been in the ground a year, I answer, preferring to take long walks and look at houses. There are poets who know better. In my case, I'm still anonymous. And with life, the poems grow shorter, get older, die between the covers of books. Down in the kitchen under the naked bulb, there is a poem dying. I'm up here, giving birth again. And the world is tremendously indifferent. I go on. It snows. Poems are written the same way. I'm sitting in a soft red chair, as deep in it as the snow outside. In the middle of time, this room has no dimensions. I can feel it standing perfectly still. Spring will come to it, fall has, winter has. Right now, outside, there is a thick cold. It presses against the windows, cries out, and into the room. I listen, then write in small, warm, black strokes. I would like to end with a confession, as if I hadn't confessed enough. But the truth is, this is a business. This is a business. The words and the music, the bits and the pieces, the muse and the silence, the arrangement of chairs and voices, and the flowers on the table.